We have some amazingly brilliant individuals up here that are truly leaders in their respective fields. So let's get started with some quick introductions. Eric, we'll lead off with you.
Hey everybody, is this mic working okay?
Sounds great.
Great. My name's Eric. My day job is at the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies in Kyoto, Japan, where I teach classes related to technology, tourism, and communication. And I also head up a research group here in Japan. It's called MAVER, Mixed Augmented Virtual Realities and Learning. Group of about 40 professionals, educators, developers, researchers, doing work around immersive learning. A large portion of our group is doing higher education, language acquisition stuff around virtual reality. I personally am into augmented reality informal learning environments. I have a passion project called Orientation, and several other projects as well that I can probably share during the course of the day. It's great to be here, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. We'll go over to Dave.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Dolan, and I'm with the VEDIV. We're content creators for the VR, and so we've made a large library of STEM content, of interactive content, which is curriculum aligned, and as well as English language learning, which is again interactive and using voice recognition, that kind of thing. So we're big believers in kind of students actively being involved in the process, and not just as a passive learning experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Now we'll go over to Gabe Baker.
Hey everyone, Gabe here from Virbela, former teacher and educational researcher. Now I work here at Virbela, working primarily on a product called Frame. It's a browser-based 3D creation and collaboration tool at framevr.io, and great to be here today.
Thank you, Gabe. And finally, Rich.
Hey everybody, Rich Henderson. I am the Director of Global Education Solutions at Lenovo. And my role is to really innovate in new areas of emerging technology for education, both K-12 and higher education globally, and how we leverage our number one device position in education to innovate and develop new emerging strategies. One of which we developed and launched this year called VR Classroom. It's actually version 2 of this solution, and the idea is how do you deliver VR in a classroom setting to a group of 30 plus students? How do you manage that content, manage those headsets across a diverse platform of users? Good to meet you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rich. I know you guys are all working on some amazing projects, so let's just start and hear what you guys are working on before we get into some of the other questions. So Eric, you want to talk about some of your projects you're working on, specifically around orientation?
Yeah, right. Orientation, as in orientation, just change the first letter to A, so augmented reality. I started it about 5 years ago, and I wanted to experiment with adding digital contents to physical textbooks. So I was adding a lot of supplementary materials for my colleagues, mostly around language learning, adding video content to be overlaid on top of English language textbooks. Also did some stuff around economics and social studies. And that kind of got me iterating on the use of augmented reality in the environment as a whole. And so it started spawning into a collaborative project with some colleagues, and now it's a rapid prototyping tool to create augmented reality learning environments, just connecting a set of playing cards using computer vision algorithm and connecting it to a Google API. So all you have to do is fill out a Google form, and you can connect a set of playing cards to any digital contents by filling out a Google form. And just with that simple concept, students can go on and fill out a Google form and connect a card to a website, a 3D model, some sound, audio, anything that's on the internet. With that simple premise, we're creating sort of gamified tours for the city of Kyoto, creating sort of like community art spaces, and just really starting to teach the concept of this new reality that digital contents will be connected to everywhere and everything we do moving towards the future. You can find that information at orientation.com.
Great, thank you. And then Gabe, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about Frames.io, that is your brainchild.
Yeah, it's just framevr.io. It's a browser-based tool that you can use to kind of create and collaborate. So there's really not much more or less to it. If it sounds like something you're interested in, definitely just check it out.
Wonderful, thank you. Now let's get started into some of these more in-depth questions. I'm going to leave this open to the group. So how can students get started creating AR, VR content?
Well, let me jump in with maybe one of the simplest ways to do this is just students using a camera. You know, when we launched VR Classroom back in 2018, we did it with a VR 180 camera, which just gave simple point and shoot kind of capture ability that you would see in VR in a 180-degree fashion, and could be automatically uploaded through that student's Google account into the Mirage. Fast forward 2 years later, we're on a different VR headset platform. We're using Pico, the Mirage VR S3, and same content though. You could take a video or a picture just of your area that you're working in. You can take a video or photos, and then you can load those simply onto a headset with a micro SD camera card. So that's a simple way of just creating some initial content that can be used for training, a virtual field trip, a tour of your backyard, which can be shared with a classroom setting. So that I would say that's the simple kind of first stage of creating VR content.
And I'll go a little bit beyond that. Okay. At Creative, we've created a large library of content, but I've always seen that what we do at Creative is really being about a model of what you can do in that environment, and we would love to have students go beyond that and create their own. And so the ability to do that, there's tools out there. There's a creator tool, there's CoSpaces, there's some other tools available, but it's not just about having those tools, but also having maybe that model of what you can do, how you can kind of orient yourself in a 3D environment. It's seeing that, and then having tools that allow them to go beyond and maybe do some interactivity with it. We would love to have somebody come up and say, what you did in mitosis is good, but I've got something better, and show it to us, and we'd love to kind of showcase that too. So I think creation is very important, and as teachers, that's what we want, is them to really do it themselves.
Yeah, and just to chime in, so I definitely second that first notion of using a camera. Photography at the fundamental level can often be easier than diving into something like 3D modeling, which can be a bit of a complicated sort of niche. But that said, I also think for a starting point, no matter where someone is kind of on the spectrum of experience, there are tools out there that really try to ease you into 3D model creation and 3D design. One of them is Tinkercad from Autodesk, which I think is free, and it's really intended for kind of the novice 3D designer, but it certainly introduces you to principles, and it can introduce students to principles that can then be applied, throughout their kind of trajectory as a 3D designer, no matter what software they end up using. So definitely recommend checking out Tinkercad.
Wonderful, thank you all. Those are some great ideas. just to piggyback off that, what are some skills and strengths that students need to be able to do 3D creation and design?
Well, hey, I'll share an experience. I mean, one of the coolest implementations of this at a university level I've seen was actually at Michigan, University of Michigan. And they were having students use VR design, 3D design as part of a design course. So it was kind of the second to final stage of a prototype experience. So they had students do, a drawing design. They then, ported that into a digital design. They had students replicate then a 3D version of that kind of initial design. And then finally, before kind of spending the time and the money to do an actual 3D print, they would take it into VR and they could share that, they could get feedback before they did this 3D printed version. So it actually saved them a lot of time and money on the 3D printing, and they were able to share it with more people in different locations. So I would say there are some kind of core design philosophies on thinking through the way you would design a VR experience, but just from a pure kind of 3D modeling standpoint, I thought it was a really good example of how VR can be used and is being used today in architecture in these different fields of study to design and prototype real life solutions before spending the money and time to build them.
I think this is kind of getting to the way that, traditionally, a lot of engineering students, and it's gone into medical training, but really this is starting and going to be touching almost every field of study and a lot of skill sets moving towards the future. Where I teach at the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies, we have a School of Global Tourism, and we are using virtual reality to do some vocational training on how to design, curate, and guide tours and create hospitality awareness and training in virtual worlds. And this has become even more relevant during the COVID situation, because now we can conduct these courses completely inside of virtual reality. So these students are learning their trade and not necessarily thinking about the design skills that go into, or the engineering skills or the coding skills that go into the virtuality, but more the design of it, the experience that it gives, and curating the experience for their potential customers. And so all that stuff and all the skills around it are going to start to be more proliferated in all fields of study, I think, moving towards the future.
Thank you much, Eric. Now let's get into not the creation side, but the how it's going to be delivered this school year. So how will AR and VR content be delivered this school year, especially taking into account COVID and the lack of VR labs currently?
Dave, you should jump in here, because I think you guys are doing some really exciting stuff around this.
Thanks. Well, one thing that we've done is that we have made this large library of VR content, but with people remote right now, it's very hard to deliver that. And so what we, over the COVID period, was to convert our library into a WebXR version of this. And so this allows that somebody who is remote, so if you have students at home, you have teachers also at home, that they would be able to work on these modules and still have that 3D environment. You still move within the environment. There's things to do. You can dissect or assemble things, drag and drop, and really do something, have some productive skills. And there's still analytics within that environment, so that the teacher is informed of what has been what the progress has been for students, and that helps to have that early identification of somebody who's fallen through the cracks a bit, or maybe an at-risk student, and help for that early intervention. So I think one of the key things for that is that instructors are still keep that contact with students through the analytics, and that's a big way they can work together. And so we're working with the Lenovo on this as well, and So we see some progress in that.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. So what we decided to do with our VR Classroom 2 solution, which we announced earlier this year, was actually prepackage some content on there so that schools would have immediate access to content. I think Dave is being modest with the number of modules. They have, close to 600 modules that are STEM based, analytics included, formative assessments throughout the VR experience. It's a pretty tremendous accomplishment in terms of content. So we wanted to give schools some of that content kind of included in whenever they buy a VR headset to use in their schools, they'll get some of that content. One of the things that we wanted to really think about was, how do we do this globally? So we have, Lenovo does business in 160 countries. So we started here in North America, where probably most of the audience is from, but we're touching the K-12 space, we're touching the higher ed space, and we think that this content needs to be very curriculum driven at this point. So you talk about kind of what's the most important piece in this COVID environment. It's making sure that we can continue to progress students along their learning out. Teachers are trying to find ways to continue to help students learn and to continue their progress around key things. And in STEM, that is so important to build those building blocks. Start there in math and engineering and sciences, so that you can build on those as you get to more advanced topics. So we think VR, and in particular, really excited for the partnership with Viative, provide that STEM-based formative assessment based thing. So even if teachers are remote and students are remote, they can see how students are progressing. They can see, whether John or Billy or Sally was able to complete the assignment, how did they do on it, and what parts might need to be retaught because they didn't do so well in the formative assessments in those pieces. So I think one, kind of back to your question, Dalen, is what is the content needed to meet learning outcomes? And then number two, I think these keys around analytics and assessment of individual users will help teachers to really use this effectively to continue to drive their learning outcomes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rich. And I can vouch for Viative's WebXR. It is a quite amazing platform with some pretty in-depth analytics. So check that out if you guys haven't. We'll head over to the next question. So what is the best way to distribute student-created content?
Well, I'll jump in just quickly on that one. You've got to make sure that when you do make a hardware purchase, that it is going to be allowing for that kind of expansion, and that it will allow outside, outside content to be able to come into that environment. So, I mean, we've created our own headset, and that was one of the things that we've done in that way. And I know with Lenovo, that's another thing, is that it does allow for you to move beyond just what's there right now, and that has to be the consideration. I think that's very, very important.
Okay. I mentioned earlier that one of the simplest ways to load content onto a headset from other sources is that you can connect it to a PC with a USB cable, which is how a lot of content transfer happens. You can use a micro SD card. Most of the headsets that are being used that are all-in-ones have a micro SD card slot, so you can load content onto a micro SD card. For VR Classroom 2, we actually developed a management platform called Think Reality, and in it gives an IT admin the capability to not only manage those headsets remotely, but to push content to those headsets, to take a student piece of content, upload it into that portal, and then you could select which headsets you wanted to send it to. So let's say you have 100 headsets at your school, but you want to designate some with math content, some with science content, because the storage on these devices isn't large enough to hold the entire library of content that you might want. So you have to kind of put content on the headsets that you want to use for specific purposes, but have the ability to then re-provision those headsets for different purposes. So we've created this admin console called Think Reality that allows you to push content out to the headsets, and then that can be user created content, it could be different Viative modules, it could be other applications or APKs that you want to distribute to those different headsets. So we're excited about the ability to do that through Think Reality.
Thank you very much, Rich. So Eric, this might be a question for you. I know you work with colleges, so what are some of the barriers to getting a VR lab in a college?
Well, a lab per se doesn't have a whole lot of barriers. Well, I mean, of course, there's cost considered in them, but the COVID situation, a lab might not be the most practical thing to get to students in a room and sharing headsets these days. But in Japan and at our university, we're thinking a lot about data collection, thinking a lot about privacy. And these have been barriers for other technologies, not just VR and AR, and getting them into classrooms. We're talking about analytics before and talking about the open web. A lot of my colleagues are very apprehensive about using these technologies, especially when you get into head tracking, eye tracking, and other kind of biometrics that come with using augmented and virtual realities. I've run into some of these issues myself using orientation because it takes in geolocation data and other sensitive bits of information. So this is one of the bigger barriers, I think. And once you start thinking about it as an institution, you could run into a couple of pitfalls, if not legally, ethically as well. So you might have some compliance issues that I'm sure Lenovo and Viative are working hard to kind of help universities overcome some of these issues and getting them into the schools as well. But yeah, the policies around the data collection are still largely forming. So even though you might rush to get some of these things into classrooms or into your institutions, you may have to make some adjustments moving forward as well.
Thank you, Eric. And yes, I totally agree with you. Pretty much one of the first questions many educators ask us about new products is the compliance and the security of the data that it's taking in. So thank you for touching on that. How does VR fit into distance learning?
Hey, if I could jump in there real quick, Dan, because I just had a conversation yesterday with Arizona State University. And we were working with them on an online biology degree program. And many of you who have science degrees in college, or maybe you have children who have gone through that, you have to pay a lab fee. You go do that lab portion, you know, at a local lab, or maybe you have to drive to campus or what have you. But you know, Arizona State University has one of the largest online programs. So they had, you know, tens of thousands of students who wanted to pursue an online science degree like biology, but they would have this always difficult thing where all of their classes are online, but they have to physically go somewhere to complete the lab portions. So we worked to distribute VR headsets to the students that were in this biology program, and they used the labs through VR to get accreditation for their lab portion. So it actually gave them assessments during the lab portions, and then they were able to, those grades reported directly to their professors, and the students were able to get credit for the lab through VR. So this not only saved time, but if you think about other fields of study, I think Dave mentioned healthcare. I know VR has been used really effectively as a replacement for like a cadaver lab, where that's extremely expensive to set up, and you can replicate that experience through VR. And you get a lot of those same benefits of kind of an in-person lab. You get higher knowledge transfer, you get higher engagement from trying to learn something in a textbook scenario. So we see it really in a supporting role for distance learning, but also being able to replace some much more expensive live in-person.
Just to follow up, there's definitely with you, Rich, on that. But I also think even beyond just the kind of recreating, equipment and settings that might be expensive or difficult to reproduce, I also think there's actually just a major qualitative difference between interacting in a 3D space with other people and interacting on a Zoom call. And it's not to say that one is necessarily better than the other in every context or kind of learning interaction, but there certainly is, I think, something to be said for like the sense of sort of shared space and togetherness that a 3D environment can cultivate and foster, even just for like coming together for a discussion about anything in the world. Certainly a cadaver lab included. But even just like kind of coming together to talk about a book, I think that there's actually it's kind of a fundamentally different communication medium that for some teachers might be a really interesting alternative to a Zoom call, where you do have the benefit of seeing someone's face, but you're also actually given the visual reminder that you're not actually in the same place. It actually doesn't foster that kind of same sense of sort of presence and co-presence with your peers and teacher. And then, the other thing that 3D environments, I think, open up is kind of a sense of persistence that you don't have with a lot of video tooling. So with video, you come in for the class. Maybe you schedule a Zoom session with your students. You come in and it's an hour, and then that's sort of that. There's no bumping into the teacher, after class to follow up. There's no bumping into your peers in the hallway, the kind of water cooler chat. But a lot of the 3D environment, kind of collaboration environments out there are kind of persistent in this way, that it's sort of like a persistent shared space that a class can have online. And yes, you can use it for your classes and meetings, but it can also just be a place where students can pop in to explore content on their own time. Maybe they bump into someone they know, maybe they bump into you, and maybe they don't.
I can add on to that if I could. I can reiterate what Gabe just said about being in a 3D space and comparing that with other forms of interaction online. Research is already showing this to be true, and giving agency, even being able to move your head and having that immediate feedback is showing higher levels of engagement and deeper impact in a lot of different ways. In a MAVER research group here in Japan, we have one researcher using virtual reality to inform academic writing, and she's seeing a lot of impact that being in virtual worlds has on a person's voice and how they point of view they give to stories, and how they want to represent their ideas. So this idea of the empathy machine is very popular with virtual reality, and it's one of probably the things that I think about the most when I'm designing education around using these devices. But to go back to what Rich was talking about earlier about getting headsets from Arizona State to their students when they couldn't come into the lab, that's wonderful. But in some ways, COVID has shown that these virtual tools are even exacerbating the digital divide in some situations, because even in where I'm at in Japan, where you think that we have the most technically savvy and highest levels of infrastructure in the world, we're finding that during COVID that we're really not up as far as infrastructure, data avenues, student device retention, and things like that. So having to come back to the basics for a lot of institutions, smaller and rural places, things like broadband, things, because these immersive worlds take a lot of bandwidth, they take a lot more processing power, and so it's showing signs and cracks in the differences in the devices our students have and the ability for them to connect to the internet. So in some ways, it's helping and showing some of the best of us during this COVID situation, what we can do using these virtual worlds. But it could be leaving some of us behind at the same time as well. And we're still getting data on how factual that might be.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that point, Eric, because that I think that's one thing that COVID-19 situation globally has shown us is that digital learning requires technology. Not just technology, but connectivity, but it requires technology. So it is really showing that digital divide in a clear way. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yes, thank you both. That is a great point that I had not even thought about yet. So thank you. We're going to leave it open to the audience now. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to submit those into the chat, or you can private message them to myself or Amber. There's no questions. I want to thank you all for being here and participating in this panel. A special thanks to Rich, Eric, Gabe, and Dave. They are amazing. I would make sure, please go check out their booths in the expo hall. I know that Lenovo has a booth, Virbela has a booth, as well as Viative. And you can actually find Eric out in the lobby. He's got a little corner over there, so you can go over there, talk to him, learn about some more of his projects. But I just want to thank you all again and enjoy the expo.
Thank you, Dalen.
Yeah, I'm showing off Gabe's Frame VR along with my orientation project too. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, great to meet you all.
I'm also going to send out a brief survey to you guys. So if you haven't taken this, feel free. You can enter to win a $500 gift card. Just select, when that opens up, click select which partners you like to stay in contact with. Select them all and continue, and you'll be entered into that drawing.
Yeah, of course.